Okay, should we get going? Great. Okay, so hello everybody, and welcome to the third and final session of the Equity, Diversity and Inclusivity in Geosciences conference. Firstly, I would like to thank all of the speakers, all of the attendees so far. And anyone joining right now, if you would like to use the chat function to share where you're joining us from, that would be really great. So there's the chat function right down the bottom of your screen. So far in the conference, yesterday we had two sessions. The first session focused on data and on how data around EDI can be used to further the cause of EDI, and had some good responses to that. And then second session was focused on awareness and a variety of themes around that, and how we can use the furthering of awareness on specific topics to further broaden the scope of EDI and really make sure that it features more heavily in our work as geoscientists going into the future. And that brings us very nicely to session 3, which is really about looking to the future in quite a broad sense around exactly how we can do this in practice. You know, what strategies for furthering EDI work and what don't in various spheres, be that accessibility for people with disabilities, visible and not, or ethnic minorities, gendered minorities, all of these various groups that we have. And there's obviously a lot of intersectionality between those groups that we have to be aware of. So I won't talk too long on exactly what we're going to be covering the session. I'll let the various speakers do that with their talks. I'll just go through a bit of housekeeping before we start. You'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A tab, and you can use that to ask questions during the event. And we'll use those questions during the Q&A session after the talks have been shown to have a discussion with our speakers, our panelists, about the topics that they present on. The other thing is that this event has a code of conduct, which has just been posted in the chat box, I believe. And please respect this code of conduct. I won't go through it now, but yes, just be aware that it's there. Other things we have going on during the event are, we have a Padlet, which is kind of like a virtual sticky board, which we use to collect any thoughts or ideas about the conference, any comments that you have, so that we can use those to reflect on what we've done going into the future. And finally, there's live captioning available. If you go to the bottom of the screen, you can select show captions. And the final thing is that this session is being recorded like all the previous ones. All of the content will then be put onto our YouTube channel afterwards, so all the pre-recorded talks and the Q&A. And you'll be able to refer back to these resources after the conference is over. So yeah, let's just get into the swing of things then. The first speaker in today's session is Dr. Melanie Finch, who is a professor at James Cook University in Australia, and works in the field of structural and metamorphic geology. And Melanie is also the president of the Women in Earth and Environmental Science in Australia, the organisation called WMESA, which aims to support, amplify and advocate for women and other marginalised genders within the geosciences. And Melanie is going to talk to us about why we lose women from geoscience and strategies we might adopt to fix the pipeline of women and other minority genders going into the geosciences, and how we might enable them to progress more clearly within the geosciences and make their presence more visible and respected. So yeah, I think that's enough from me now, and we can hear Melanie's talk. She may or may not join us later. She has a slightly patchy internet connection where she is right now, but we will see.
Hello, my name is Melanie Finch and I'm a geoscientist at James Cook University in Northern Queensland in Australia. So today I'm going to talk to you about why we lose women from geoscience. And I guess for this presentation, I've sort of got more of my WMESA hat on than my geoscientist hat on. So WMESA is Women in Earth and Environmental Science in Australasia, and I'm the president of that network, and I'm going to be talking a bit more about that later on. So first, some numbers. So in Australia, we see this sort of scissor plot that's common to many places around the world, many institutions around the world. And so what we have here is women in grey, men in black, and the percentage. So this is students in our universities in a bachelor degree, which is an undergraduate degree. And in a postgraduate degree, which is like a PhD or a master's. So we've got about a 40-60 split there. And at the earliest levels of academia, that split is pretty much maintained. There's a small change there. So level A is a postdoc level and level E is a professor level. And so we've got everything in between as well. And what we can see is that the proportion of women gradually drops off. A lot of geoscientists in Australia end up in the mining industry, and we see the same sort of pattern of results there as well. A lot of the time I show a graph like this and somebody asks me whether I think that this problem is actually fixed and that these lines will just sort of even out by themselves over time because of gender equity measures that have been put in place already, and that these just need to filter through, and eventually we'll see the same number of professors from both genders. So I decided to look at historical data to see whether there was any indication that this was actually happening. So I looked at the proportion of male and female earth science students we have at universities in Australia. So we have a census here in Australia. That's where these data have come from. And so we've got data from 2006, 2011 and 2016, and the 2021 data will go over here. It's coming out soon, hopefully. And so what we can see is that there's about double the amount of male students compared to female students. And there's no indication that the proportion of female students is getting higher compared to the proportion of male students. In fact, there's an indication that the problem might be getting a bit worse here. So the gap might be getting a bit wider. So this suggests to me that what we're currently doing is insufficient for fixing this problem. So WMESA is Women in Earth and Environmental Sciences in Australasia. We advocate for gender equity across the Australasia region, and we also create a supportive network of women working in earth and environmental sciences across academia, industry and government, so quite inclusive of the different areas that earth and environmental scientists work in Australia. We wrote an article in Advances in Geoscience in 2020, and it's about the problems in gender equity that still persist across our region. So some of what I'm going to show you today is based on that article, and you certainly, it's open access, certainly go take a look at that if you want to know more. So yeah. Okay, so this is one of my classes of third year students. It's a small class, so economic geologists, and there's about you know, a 50-50 gender split in my classroom. And so this was taken a few years ago, and those students have, most of the students have gone to work in the mining industry. And I know that yeah, slowly we're going to see the proportion of female students from this cohort drop out of that mining industry over time. So I was really curious to know why we lose women from geoscience. It's not just the mining industry, obviously it's academia as well, as we were just looking at. So I became interested in this and sort of approached this from a really unique place. So yes, I'm now a lecturer in geoscience, a teaching and research position, but I had a history of psychology. So I used to be an experimental psychologist. I worked at the Department of Defence here in Australia, and did some work on, night vision devices, but also did some work on implicit biases in making judgments. So that's sort of relevant to what I'm talking about today. And I'm the president of WMESA as well, and we advocate for change in gender equity. So the way that I see the reason why we lose women from geoscience is that my students and all, probably students around the world, they all love sort of geoscience students. These students who end up in our third-year geoscience classes, they do tend to love what they do. And the female students love it just as much as the male students. But there are negative experiences that everyone faces in their career. It just seems that there are more negative experiences for women than there are for men. And what happens over time is that these build up and eventually they outweigh the love of geoscience. And I guess I formed this point of view by talking to my students who have gone into industry or gone into academia and eventually left it. And this is what they report. Eventually the bad things outweighed how much they love their job. So I want to know, I've been looking at what we can do to reduce some of these negative things and slowly start to, get that balance sort of back on track by eliminating some of these negative experiences that really only seem to affect women. So I've come up with 8 different areas which seem to be the major causes of why women leave geoscience. And there's an extended version of this same talk that's available on YouTube. If you Google my name on YouTube, there, and you can watch that there. It goes for about an hour. But so today I'm only going to talk about a couple of these, and the first is unconscious bias. So unconscious bias is, how we make quick judgments, unconscious bias, unconscious decisions and judgments all the time. So a lot of these judgments that we make, that our brain makes, are really useful, and that's just an evolutionary adaptation. It's the way that our brains work. And it's important to recognise that everybody has unconscious biases, and these are just a result of your culture, your background, your experiences. You have no control over these sort of unconscious biases initially. So this is some of those biases. So for example, there's the similarity attraction bias is the preference for people who are similar to you. An overconfidence bias is the belief that your feeling about the situation is more accurate than objective criteria. So an example of this is, perhaps you're on a job panel, you're interviewing applicants for a particular position, and, perhaps someone comes in and into the room and one of the applicants, and you get along really well with them, you have a really good rapport with them, but perhaps their track record isn't as good as the other applicants. So you might feel like they would be really good for the job, even though the objective criteria suggest that that is not the case. Conformity bias is conforming with the opinion of the majority. So just say there's 5 of you that are interviewing all these different applicants for the job, and 4 people have the same point of view, and you're the 5th and you have a different point of view on who would be the best person. There's a tendency to conform with the opinion of the majority in that situation. So bias in science has been known for a long time. So this paper is from the 60s, the late 60s, and it describes the Matthew effect, which is the over-recognition of those at the top of the scientific profession and the misallocation of credit to those people at the expense of more junior colleagues. More recently, we've had the Matilda effect coined, which is the under-recognition of female scientists. So how do we know that these biases actually exist? Well, there's been a whole stack of studies that have, in gender bias research, that have tried to figure out exactly what's happening with the Matthew effect and the Matilda effect. So the format of these studies is basically quite similar. So a group of participants in the study are asked to assess the quality of a scientist. And in a lot of these studies, the participants are actually scientists. So you have scientists that are recruited and they're asked to assess the quality of someone else. And so to assess the quality of that scientist, these participants are given an identical CV. So all the details on the CV are the same, except for the name at the top. On half, there's a male name. On the other half, there's a female name at the top of this CV, but the contents themselves are identical. And these studies have found time and again that both male and female scientists rate male scientists as significantly better than female scientists, even though the detail on the CVs is the same. So it's not just CVs that have been tested, it's letters of recommendation, it's publication records, it's all the metrics that we're commonly assessed on. So studies have also revealed that there's gender bias actually in all of the key performance indicators of academia. So reference letters for postdocs, peer review, paper citations, startup funding, salary negotiations, all of these things. So these studies demonstrate that there is no level playing field. That one sex has an unfair advantage over the other in actually every key performance indicator within academia. That means that it's impossible to fairly compare the experiences and outputs and achievements of male and female academics, which is a scary thing because we often are in a situation where we do need to compare men and women academics. So the first thing I can recommend to sort of combat this is that we all take the Harvard implicit bias test. So this test, there's a range of different categories and it assesses or helps you realize the biases that you might have. So yeah, that's a good start for becoming aware of your own implicit biases. But the next thing I want to talk about is awards and jobs and how we can mitigate some of these unconscious biases and make our selection criteria for awards and jobs more objective. So this is just some data from this paper here that I talked about before. And so we've got these two geological associations in New Zealand and in Australia, and they've got a pretty poor track record of gender equity in awardees of these major awards here. And so this is something we see all around the world. We see that the data from the Nobel Peace Prize or the Nobel Prizes every year and all these sorts of things as well. So this article published in The Conversation, which is an online sort of publication, it highlighted some actions that we can take to ensure that that awards are awarded in a more fair sort of way. So it made some recommendations about, ensuring that women know about the award or the job, if it's a job that's being offered up. Can women self-nominate for the awards? Because we know that they're less likely to be nominated by their peers. Is there enough time to put an application together, and is the application process quick? So there are a number of studies that show that women have more demands on their time than men. So that's why these things are important for increasing the proportion of women applying. Finally, is the selection process objective? So that one's a really important one for overcoming biases. So it's also important to think about equity and diversity in recruitment. And so we can think about this at these four main stages of recruitment. So first, when you're advertising the job, so using inclusive language does tend to help. So it's not always clear what inclusive language actually means. So, the phrase "is a natural leader" doesn't seem to be gendered, but these sorts of inclusions, they tend to put women off applying for the job. And that's what we're trying to avoid. We're really trying to get as many women as possible applying for this job and not put off by the way that the job is described. It's also good to have to state that there's a commitment to flexible working arrangements or diversity and equity and leave arrangements. So those women, because they tend to have greater caring roles, those sorts of things can be appealing. Having a long open period is important because of, we were saying before about the demands on women's time. You can also ask diversity groups to advertise to their members, and that can ensure that women are seeing the job. So diversity groups like WAMISA are happy to advertise to their members. We often see that diverse people are attracted to diverse people. So, women might have a higher proportion of female students than men have. And so you can ask diverse people if they know of suitable applicants for a job. And it's really good to monitor the diversity of the application pool before the job ad closes, because in some institutions it's very hard to reopen a job after it's closed, and so doing something about all of these things might be necessary before the job ad has closed. So it's a good idea to keep an eye on that. The selection committee should be at least 30% men and 30% women, but you can't assume that a diverse committee is unbiased, because as you've seen, we all have these biases. And so it's good to have unconscious bias training, but this needs to be done immediately before recruitment. There's studies that show that it's not effective if there's if there's a lengthy period of time between the training and the recruitment. Okay. For the shortlist, when you're making the shortlist of the applicants, it's good to set out an agreed list of evaluation criteria, but also to be open-minded to non-traditional and diverse pathways and how merit is assessed. Those things are important. It's important to assess only based on the application, not on the personal knowledge of the applicant. Otherwise, your biases are more likely to come into play. Assessing fit of the applicants can be quite problematic. That's how we end up with groups that are all very similar in terms of their demographic kind of profiles. So that's a kind of a dangerous word in this context. Assessing beyond metrics of the number of publications, grants, and Haitian disease. What about teamwork? Teamwork's so important. What about leadership and teaching? Those sorts of things are really important for being a successful academic, and so we should be assessing those as well. It's also important to recognise that student assessments of teaching are biased. So men are rated more positively than women, and white academics are rated more positively than academics of colour. So when we're looking at those student assessments of teaching, it's good to keep that in mind. When we're looking at the assessment of the applicants, it can be good to ask the applicants to summarise their most significant research contributions, and that allows them to define merit in the way that they see merit. And so it might bring a new dimension of that criteria to the panel. And you can also consider embedding diversity into questions, like these sorts of things here. Okay, so I think that if we can start to address some of these sorts of issues, we can start to address this balance between negative experiences and a love of geoscience, and start to bring things back more into a balanced way. But it's really important to think of how our biases are affecting our judgments about things like awards and recruitment, and that's the sort of one of the first steps to change. So if you're interested to find out more about WMESA, you can check us out on wmesa.net. No matter where you are in the world, you can join WMESA. We do operate mainly across the Australasian region, but if you want to keep in touch and be part of this vibrant community, you are more than welcome. You can check us out on wmesa.net. Thanks very much.
Excellent. So thank you very much to Melanie for giving that talk. And I think that we'll get to this in the Q&A again as well later. But I think that it's very interesting that she laid out a lot of ways we might seek to tip the balance in a quite formal sense by ensuring there are quotas for EDI to be fulfilled on a selection panel, for example, and when going to assess applicants. And I think that in some settings these criteria are more easily adopted naturally than in others. So we might look at politics in the UK, for example. I'm British, and I really see in the politics of the UK a reflection of the fact that you're always looking for, they always seem to be looking for people to work in politics who are similar to them. So the diversity is often not there. So there is a tendency to that for sure. Now, keep telling us where you're from. Also, we have some really interesting places where people are participating from. So Iran, quite a few people from Canada. Quite a few people from the US, quite a few people from Ireland and the UK. Excellent. That's really nice to see. And do remember, if you have any questions, to post those in the Q&A. We have a couple in there right now, which is really nice. Yeah. Yeah, moving on. Next, we have a talk by Sean Thatcher. And Sean is a lecturer in the City University of New York at the College of Staten Island. And mostly his research and teaching focuses around the use of geospatial technology, so GIS and these sorts of things, for analysis of coastal zones relating to climate change and coastal erosion. This is also a problem in Ireland, where I'm based, and I know there are quite a few researchers working on that here as well. So that's nice to see, a nice connection there. Sean is physically disabled, and he's going to bring his experience of that to his talk about how we can make fieldwork, which is a very crucial aspect of geoscience, not only in terms of learning about the world we're in, but also in terms of inspiring others to become involved in geoscience. So I know that my pathway into geoscience was very much focused on being outside and being in the outdoors, and fieldwork is obviously a really important part of that. So yeah, let's hear from Sean about how we might make fieldwork as accessible and inclusive as possible going forwards.
Hello everyone, and welcome to my talk on fieldwork accessibility, where we're at and should be going. My name is Sean Thatcher, and I'm thrilled to talk to you today about this really important topic that I'm very passionate about. Before we get started, I just want to give you a brief introduction about myself. I'm a first-year lecturer in engineering and environmental science at the College of Staten Island. I teach courses relating to earth and ocean sciences. Courses revolving around climate change, along with utilizing GIS and remote sensing technology as tools to understand and visualize the changes that are happening in real-world settings. I am also the Director of Operations for the International Association for Geoscience Diversity, and I'm thrilled to be part of such a welcoming and inclusive organization that has opened many doors for me, physically and networking-wise as well. I'm also a collaborator on the Geospace program, which we'll talk about in a few slides. And I am also a white male quadriplegic due to a spinal cord injury that happened 13 years ago. This is a picture that I love about myself, working in the field in Arizona and the Grand Canyon with my arms really extended, really enjoying the moment in this obligatory Grand Canyon photo. So just to start off with this really quickly, these experiential fieldwork opportunities in the geosciences are extremely beneficial and provide many notable benefits in the academic development for many of our students. It allows them to build confidence while working in the field and learning new things. It also allows them to improve retention in our program as well. Many students that go on these experiences like being a part of them and like sharing these experiences with their friends, and it allows them to remain part of our programs from individual day trips to more extended field programs. It also allows them to apply the theory they learn in the classroom into real-world settings as well. It also encourages their identity formation as geoscientists, allowing them to see themselves in the field they're working towards. Lastly, it provides them with networking opportunities as well. Many of us have field camp stories or field stories in general, either good or bad, that are become vital to our understanding of how our fields work and operate. We like to tell these stories and share them with friends, especially the ones that may not go well. This is a primary way that we also recruit students into our programs. Many of the images that we share on brochures or flyers are very similar to the ones that I have on the right-hand side of the screen. The top image is several students that have ascended the summit of SP Crater in northern Arizona. while the bottom image are several other students that are investigating the blocky lava flow at the base. This is also a primary requirement for many undergraduate degree programs for bachelor's degrees. It's also a requirement for many students that are interested in applying to graduate school, and many employers are also looking at whether or not students had a field experience while applying to their companies and organizations. Despite the importance of fieldwork in our degree programs, it's also been a barrier to access for many students. Despite this importance, it's inaccessible to many. So for example, students with disabilities, whether they are permanent or temporary, this is also a very vital barrier for students that have family responsibilities at home, whether or not they are parents or are taking care of other family members as well. And this is also a barrier for students that are experiencing financial hardships. Students have a very hard time being able to take off work for 4 to 6 weeks to move to a remote part of the country to work for numerous hours, and it can actually prevent them from participating, as being able to be employed to pay bills is a vital component of their personal lives. Due to this barrier to access, many students that are not capable of participating in these types of experiential fieldwork activities will either switch or leave programs at a time when many of our programs are experiencing slower or lower enrollment numbers. They cannot pursue careers within the geosciences as well. So by not having the very vital application component, they cannot apply to these programs. Also, they may not be able to see themselves in the field. If they're physically incapable of being able to participate in these programs, they will not see themselves in this field and will leave to find other degree programs that are more inclusive. These experiences, by not participating in these experiences, students can also experience significant imposter syndrome. By not being able to participate as their peers, they can move on to other programs as well. As an important requirement for degree completion and career readiness, we must find new ways of developing these opportunities to allow all students to participate equitably for degree completion. COVID-19 was a revolution for remote options. Despite the tragic health crisis, this served as an eye-opening moment for our community on the systemic problem that many students have been experiencing for years. Many students, even though they were physically capable of entering the field, were at home in quarantine because of this health emergency. This created an enhanced willingness to create remote field experiences that were flexible for personal schedules, as many students were balancing very trying experiences at home. They were rigorous. They were very capable of engaging students in an academic environment. They were accommodating. They allowed students to participate in ways that they could by creating ways for them to be engaged with their peers as well. They're also informative. Students that were participating in these types of experiences learned how to do various field techniques, or even learn really advanced technological skills that will serve them well in their future. So this health crisis highlighted a significant issue facing students in our field and served as an opportunity that created experiences that included everyone by accommodating everyone. The evaporation of these remote options very much so happened as we went to return to our normalcy. So while we were adjusting to the new normal in our educational settings, we just as quickly returned to the old normal when we were creating our experiential learning opportunities. Our in-person field experiences quickly eliminated the need for remote options in many of our universities. This elimination of remote instruction returned the same barrier to degree completion that students were experiencing prior to this health emergency. And even the removal of remote student services was occurring that now made it even more complicated for them to be returning to these in-person activities, as they were very much so used to these remote options. And there is a lack of flexibility. We need to do better on creating opportunities for students to learn and engage while understanding their personal hardships. Returning to in-person is not the issue, but eliminating the supports that were promoting the inclusion of all students is the issue. This creates an opportunity in our field to incorporate the lessons learned during the pandemic into our in-person experiences by hybridizing them to promote equitable collaboration for students that may not be able to physically participate in these types of experiences, along with promoting the inclusivity of it as well by providing the accommodations needed for students to be successful. The incorporation of remote and in-person participation is vitally important. Collaboration between in-person and remote individuals is important for an evolving workforce dynamic. More frequently, there is an increase in remote and hybridized workspaces, and the increased availability of remote technologies are making this incredibly possible. In our own personal lives, this is how many of us are working within our professional spheres and how we should train students looking to enter the workforce. Think about the ways that we collaborate on a variety of projects and initiatives that many of us are involved in, along with many of our committee meetings as well. Because of our busy schedules, many of these meetings have remained hybridized, where we are having in-person engagement along with virtual options for engagement as well, due to having busy schedules. In-person instruction is a key component of the experiential learning experience, but hybridization provides an equitable option for those that need remote options to participate. This hybridization can also enhance the learning experience by incorporating activities that cannot be done while in a traditional field setting. Because students are participating in a hybridized approach, they can utilize technologies that you cannot use in these remote field settings. For example, being able to engage in data processing while students are collecting samples from the field. A great example of a hybridized collaborative field experience is the Geospace program. This is the Geosciences Promoting Accessible Collaborative Experiences and is an accessible and inclusive planetary and geologic field course that takes place in northern Arizona. In 2022, we spent 11 days in northern Arizona, and in 2023, we will be spending 14 days in northern Arizona as well. This utilized a hybrid approach for virtual participation, as you can see in this top image on the right, along with our virtual participation as well, as you can see in the same image, but at the bottom of that graphic as well. Our collaboration between our in-person and virtual students consisted of both synchronous and asynchronous technologies, allowing them to communicate and share information with each other in near real time. And this serves as a model for future field experiences as well, as we encourage the virtual participation of students of diverse needs. If you are interested in more information about this program, feel free to follow us on Twitter at GeoSpaceUF, or visit our website using the QR code on the right. So for our remote and in-person collaboration, we had our virtual students work as mission control. So our virtual students were analyzing sites before our in-person exploration by looking and investigating visual imagery, hyperspectral imagery, along with data sets such as digital elevation models to investigate these field sites. They then presented this information before the in-person exploration in mission control briefings. They also proposed questions for investigations to our in-person students to investigate while exploring the field sites. Our in-person students acted as rovers while at these field locations. They explored field sites to answer questions that the virtual students proposed during their briefings. They collected data using UAVs, GPS, along with samples from various locations in the field sites. At the end of the day, they then presented these findings back to Mission Control. Our Mission Control provided a top-down perspective from these field sites, while our in-person groups provided a bottom-up perspective that neither one could really experience without the combination of collaborative working together. So both groups worked collaboratively to synthesize their results and were very dependent upon each other for successes in the field. Despite the successes, there were also needs for improvements moving forward. So students expressed an overwhelmingly positive experience to the mentoring and mentoring they received and the professional development they received as well. From an academic perspective, Geospace has been my on-ramp to graduate school, one student said. I feel much more equipped to work on teams discussing technical material and compiling findings into presentations. They also went on to say that I went from knowing almost zero about volcanoes to feeling like I could carry on a real conversation about phreatomagmatic interactions and the holes in northern Arizona. From a professional perspective, one student also said the Geospace project greatly increased my confidence in my ability to succeed as a geologist, working on building that identity in our field as well. All excellent mentors in the field that transparently discussed the hardships of academia and helped me see myself doing real concrete work for the first time since the incident. Some of our students have had very negative experiences in the past, and this served as an opportunity to really overcome those challenges. But the challenges that we did experience were mostly social. I think working with the virtual team for research presentations went pretty smoothly, but one of the biggest barriers was not in the academics, but in these social connections, emphasizing the importance of this moving forward. These are things that we need to work on and should consider in the future. So as a summary for a brief conclusion, I have 5 points that I really want you to take away. Field experiences are important for geoscience students, but it has historically been a barrier for degree completion. Remote options remove the physical barrier during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, but as we return to these in-person activities, we must remember the value that these remote opportunities had that promoted inclusion. Hybridizing field experiences creates new ways to engage in-person and remote students without compromising the academic rigor of our experiences. And lastly, the educational and mentoring experiences are important, but creating engaging and social connections for our students are vital. I appreciate your willingness to listen to my talk and inviting me to present fieldwork accessibility where we're at and should be going. Feel free to reach out to me in the future at sean.thatcher@csi.cuny.edu, and I look forward to hearing and working with you in the future.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Sean. It was really great to hear about the Geospace initiative. Sounds kind of quite exciting following what other people are doing in the field remotely, kind of like you might feel in like NASA mission control or something. It's kind of cool. And it's quite a nice example of the way that we can use technological advances that have come about in the last 10 or so years to really benefit people. I can personally, I'm quite a skeptic when it comes to the benefits that technology can bring. I think that the power structures that are encoded into a lot of technology mean that it appears to be beneficial to marginalized groups when actually it often works against them. But this is a really nice example of technology actually acting to improve the experience of some marginalized groups, which is really great to see. Thank you for showing us that. Just a reminder to keep the questions coming in the Q&A tab down at the bottom of your screen. And if you've joined us recently, to let us know where you're joining us from in the chat box. That's really nice to see. We've got people coming from many different places today. So our next speaker is Alanna Higgins, who is a visiting professor at West Virginia University in the USA, and her research is primarily concerned with food security and food justice and sovereignty and the political ecologies of food. And that's something I'm personally very interested in. I like to know where my food's coming from, and it's a very kind of primal and very primary factor in many of our lives. We all need to eat to survive. So that's nice. And she's also somebody working in educational equity and how we can teach geoscience and other subjects more equitably. And that's what she's going to discuss with us today with a presentation on universal design learning in geosciences. So thank you very much, Alanna. Please take it away.
Hello, my name is Alanna Higgins. I am currently a visiting assistant professor in the Department of Geology and Geography at West Virginia University. And today I'm going to be talking about universal design for learning in the geosciences. So universal design for learning, or as I'm going to shorten it in this presentation, UDL, has a goal to create both a classroom environment and the overall curriculum that could be understood and used by everyone, regardless of their individual situations or needs. And as Kevin Gannon writes, put simply, UDL asks us to stop thinking about disability and accommodations as somehow deviating from the desired norms for teaching and learning, and instead challenge ourselves to create a learning space that might not need to make accommodations in the first place. Here we have a matrix showing us the Universal Design for Learning guidelines. The columns show us, there's 3 of them. They show us how to provide multiple means for engagement, representation, and action and expression, which really helps us as educators to get to the why, what, and hows of learning. The columns show us different actions we can take to really get to issues of student access, then how to further build out access and skills within students in order to internalize these skills and competencies within them. So the overall goals are to have expert learners who are purposeful and masterful, who are resourceful and knowledgeable, and who are strategic and goal-directed. But in addition to those things, what I really love about UDL is that it's an opportunity for us to make our field, our classrooms, our individual courses or modules more accessible and potentially more equitable. We know that no matter a person's ability, that there's a wide diversity of what we learn, how we learn it, and why we learn it. And UDL scholars argue that narrowing down who we accommodate for, so building a class and then retrofitting accommodations into that class, is actually narrowing down access for everyone. UDL isn't just about disability arguments, of course, right? They're very important. We need to recognize how people with different abilities navigate the world. But we look with UDL to transcend those individual needs to make the course content and the classroom environment itself accessible to everyone, right? Of course, this doesn't mean that we ignore those individual needs, but the goal, instead of focusing on accessibility and focusing on access, is to make sure that you're thinking about these needs to begin with. Since I have started implementing universal design for learning within my own courses, I have found this to be true, right? So sitting down and thinking about the different situations my students may find themselves in, right? And what they would need out of my course to be more successful, and then building the course from there. So I've actually found, right? When I get a letter from our Office of Accessibility Services saying a student has accommodations, here are what they are, right? My class is actually built where they're already getting all of those accommodations, right? They're already getting everything they need. Or if it's something I haven't anticipated, it's a really quick pivot because the class is already a little bit flexible in those things on engagement, on representation, right? And on actions. And that may sound a little bit overwhelming. It's a lot of time to do a course from scratch, a lot of time that honestly, right, we don't get or have. But, you know, just thinking about these things can really help. Universal design for learning doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? You can start with really small steps, which is what I've done in the past. And then, you know, as time goes on, you get to tinker more and more, right? So you don't have to necessarily break down your class to nothing and then build it back up, right? You can slot things in as you find them or as you need. The rest of my presentation is going to focus specifically on implementing UDL in the geosciences, but I briefly wanted to talk about existing barriers within geoscience education, both as an activity that we practice, right, as educators, but also geoscience as a field. As we've heard several people talk about, right, field sites can be an issue because we have to think about things around mobility, hearing, vision, because a lot of the time field schools or field trips are built around the assumption of an able-bodied person. This is also a potential in laboratory spaces, thinking about lighting situations, even equipment protocols, how your labs or experiments are done, as well as data, right? So data needs to be accessible, not only financially, right, but students have to understand it. For instance, right, I can't just give my global climate students an Excel spreadsheet of numbers, you know, that's 50 rows long. I need to explain what it is, how it was done, what we're doing with it, etc. Additionally, we have considerations in the classroom space, right? What course materials are we using? Are they prohibitively expensive? Considerations around instructor verbal and body language. An example would be on a Zoom class or recording such as this, as our conference organizers have shared with us, right? Making sure we share our video so that people could potentially read our lips if needed. Additionally, having considerations about 2D versus 3D material or using a mix. And then there's social and institutional barriers, right? This could be policies at absolutely any level, finances, personal obligations, different bodily functions, and then biases and discrimination that exist not only out in the field, right, but can potentially exist in an institution, right, and in a classroom. And this also includes discrimination and, you know, we have to think about gender and sexuality, religion and racialization when we think about, you know, the course material we use, understanding that our students may have not all had the same opportunities before they've come to our classroom, and what we're really asking them when we're sending them out into the field or asking them to go do things outside of the classroom. Right, so UDL asks us to identify those barriers I spoke about and really to just do something about them, right? To try and get rid of those barriers to begin with, right? And there's not As individual instructors, there's only one of me, right? So I can't go to every individual student's field trip, etc., right? But I can do things to potentially mitigate instances, or even just thinking about them to begin with. So I'm going to give a couple of examples of implementing UDL in geoscience courses. The first one I'm going to talk about was during the emergency remote teaching at the very beginning of the pandemic. My colleague, Erin Maxwell, and I wrote a short paper about our experiences doing this. So we observed learning barriers in our classes. Mine was a large 100 level class. His was a very smaller upper level class, but it was very technically complicated because it was around GIS science. So even prior to the pandemic, we noticed that students had really heavy course loads, that they had different caregiving responsibilities, full-time jobs, or other monetary and technological constraints. A lot of my students that semester did not have laptops. And all of these barriers themselves were compounded by a lack of physical access to a classroom, right? So I couldn't print off a test to give to a student if they didn't have a laptop, or be able to let them into a computer lab. So when we had to pivot to the emergency remote teaching, we decided to implement universal design for learning and to use some different engagement techniques, some different representation techniques in order to try and make our classes as accessible as possible at the time. So we assess student needs. I particularly like to do this no matter what is going on in the world, just seeing if there's any issues, or for instance, right, our university likes to schedule classes back to back sometimes, right? So students would say, I'm not trying to leave Zoom early, but like I have to go to another class that at that point was still meeting in person. Using different means of engagement and representation, particularly things about utilizing different types of media to convey the information that we were giving them on top of the textbook. Or Erin Maxwell spent a phenomenal amount of time recording himself to make videos that are on YouTube that his students could use as reference materials, because we were not physically accessible for office hours on campus. We also utilized mastery-oriented feedback, so students could go back to previous assignments or different types of assessments to see what they got wrong and why, and then work on it for points or portions of points, along with using things like accessible platforms and open source software. So because students were not on campus for the GIS course, they couldn't access ArcGIS. So Maxwell looked into different open source GIS software that taught them the same skills. And because I knew some of my students didn't have laptops, I made sure any tests or assessments were easily done through a phone or tablet as well. This semester, I'm getting quite a lot of experience of face-to-face learning, particularly with visually impaired students. So as I mentioned, right in the beginning, I took small steps with universal design for learning. And then I really did sit down and think about, okay, how do I build these classes from the ground up with universal design for learning, right? But we don't always know what our students need. And I didn't know that one of my students was going to be blind, right? So I already had customizable information, right? Word docs or Google Docs that the students could copy, so they could change the font, they could have a screen reader read it out for them, whatever they needed. But I quickly learned that I needed even more alternative means of representation because I needed alternatives for that visual information. Luckily, I was already doing alt text, right, where we describe the picture that we use in a document or a PowerPoint. But working with the Teaching and Learning Commons and the Office of Accessibility Services here at WVU, we've used tactile images, which are sort of like images made of Braille, and different 3D printing to convey the course content in another way besides the student reading the textbook, right? So really thinking about illustrating the content through multiple media, having the textbook or the readings, having different videos so that it could be explained different ways, having these tactile images and 3D printing, and actually really making sure to thoroughly describe graphs or charts or pictures during a lecture. And going back to considerations at the very beginning of my talk, right, when we say narrowing who we accommodate for narrows access overall, I have actually had, in making sure to thoroughly describe these images, I have had most of the class say, you describe these so thoroughly that I really, really understand what's going on here, where normally I'd be confused, right? So that's just another example of universal design for learning really opening up the classroom to making sure that we give our learners what they need to succeed, right? And the student has been blind for a while, so they're very well versed in assistive technologies, but just making sure that they have access to them, which has helped some other students as well, particularly with screen readers. So I'm just going to briefly go over challenges and promises. Challenges that my colleague and I have experienced is a lack of engagement at department and institutional levels. Not necessarily a lack of want, right? But saying, yeah, we need to figure out how to do this, but not knowing how to, or not having pre-existing resources to implement UDL. There's also technological issues. These happen to everyone. You can send a PDF and for some reason the alt text didn't save. And then assistance with accessible course materials, right? Sometimes I have had to chase up an office for a 3D printed item or a tactile image that we really need for class, right? But that's not to scare you off, because UDL has a lot of promise, right? Inclusive environments have been proven to lead to student success. This is really important in general, but especially in the geosciences, when we need to think about accessible fieldwork and about what counts as geoscience work and learning, right? As a lot of things shift towards GIS, right, we need to consider, do we really need students in the field for X amount of hours? It is important, don't yell at me, right? But we have to think about that shifting landscape. Utilizing UDL also makes it easier to shift modalities, right, from face-to-face to online, or online to face-to-face. And perhaps most importantly, right, by making class design smart from the start, right, the courses have aimed to remove barriers like accessibility, like time restraints, and this has really helped us to create inclusive environments for all of our students, right? Not just those of them who have come to us with the need for accommodation. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much, Alanna. That was a really, comprehensive discussion about how to make learning as accessible or as involved for both students and educators alike as possible in geoscience. And we all really need to take these ideas on board, particularly those who are delivering the teaching. And this, I mean, this is very much focused on the academics. So I don't know if there are many people from industry here. If you're from academia or industry, maybe you could say in the chat. But it's very common, the approach in education, to take a sort of rigid approach. Certainly in the UK, I remember at school, it was very inflexible as to what you could do, and in university to a degree as well, it was again quite inflexible. So having that flexibility encoded into a course design right from the get-go is really important, and I think your ideas around that are very crucial and very essential. That's great. So I'm nearly on to our final speaker, who's Chris Jackson. And Chris has actually been getting pretty involved in the chat. He's been providing us with some resources that we might look at in the chat function around fieldwork, and also around the I don't remember exactly what it was about. But yes, Chris is currently employed at Jacobs, which is a large engineering consultancy, as the director of sustainable geoscience. And prior to that, he was a professor at Imperial College London and at the University of Manchester in sedimentary basins, being his particular research specialty. And Chris is something of sort of academic geoscience celebrity, certainly within the UK. He's given a lot of public talks and has been on television a few times, so I'd certainly heard of him prior to this this talk. But in this talk for us here, he's going to speak about a project that has very recently come to completion called the EQUATOR project, which is working towards equity in postgraduate geography, earth and environmental sciences research. So let's learn about that now from Chris Jackson.
Hi, I'm Chris Jackson, and just to describe myself, I'm a black 46-year-old man who's currently wearing black glasses and a black t-shirt. And welcome to you all today for this important event, and a big thank you as well to Evie and the team at EDIG for inviting me to come present the results arising from the NERC-funded EQUATOR project, which was working towards equity in geoscience postgraduate research. And as you can see here, this happens because, or this project happened, was able to happen because of the collective energy and input of a big group of people, as you can see there in the EQUATOR author list. And I'd just like to specifically highlight Natasha Dowie, who was the project PI and really led us through what was a very tricky project with a lot of competing kind of demands. And also thanks to the institutions and different bodies listed at the bottom of the slide there who supported us through these through this project. So what was the EQUATOR project, and why did it happen? Well, we knew there was inequity in postgraduate research, PGR. There was a substantial challenge there. And so, you know, the summary is there's a markedly lower representation of ethnic minority students in PGR than in postgraduate level overall, and that includes MSc or undergraduate level in the UK, due to a range of different discriminatory practices and cultural inequalities that exist. And Geosciences comes out of this looking particularly bad because of a number of subject-specific issues that we have. That headline is captured in these graphs here on the left-hand side. So if you take the first pair of columns in here, these are looking at the total the total number in terms of percentage of the population, total population, who identify as Black, Asian, mixed or other. And we can see that whether we look at the census overall or we look at the age group 18 to 24, and that's the age group of people who would typically be entering higher education, we can see that number is between about 14 and 18%. If we then go and look at the total student population, for all disciplines and total sciences as well within all the disciplines or all the subjects you can do at university, you can see it's higher. So there's almost an overrepresentation of those groups in overall. If you look at it in totality, you can see the bars are higher. But if we look at the pink bits in here, we can see that there's 8% here for black, and here there's 10% in here. So there's a slight decrease at sciences against the overall university going age group for the UK as a whole. It gets worse again then, obviously, if you go to the right-hand column here and look at earth sciences specifically. We can see that overall, just the racial and ethnic groups being considered here, overall, they're underrepresented against the UK population, but also specifically the pink colours in here, black students are doing particularly badly or are particularly underrepresented in earth sciences. So they're the numbers which kind of highlight, illustrate the issue, and then motivate activities, and many of which we've seen in the last few years. And one of those activities was the EQUATOR project. Why do they exist? Well, we have a range of things that contribute to what is known as hostile environments. So to borrow one of Theresa May's Conservative government terms, or that was applied to that time, you know, there's a hostile environment and there's structural inequalities, and therefore that pushes people out or makes them less likely to go towards a discipline. Some of these are pre-university, of course. So these are things like the stereotypical image of geologists. As you can see, white men, typically with hard hats in some windswept beach, collecting some data. And, you know, that's not who we all are, of course. Lack of visible role models of different types. The idea that geosciences, or the fact that geosciences has its roots in colonial history around resource extraction in foreign lands. That is not particularly welcoming to certain groups of people. Career perceptions about what you can do afterwards, and accessibility to the natural environment. There's some work that Natasha led on a few years ago, which showed that about 6% of people said they entered earth sciences because they had a lifelong love of the natural environment. And obviously, if, let's say, racial and ethnic minorities are more likely to live in urban environments rather than having access to the countryside to be inspired by the kind of the landscapes around them, then they may be less attracted to geosciences. So there's a number of things that are happening as people are growing up that mean that these groups are less likely to enter geosciences. There's also issues around students' experience as well, very poor faculty representation, bias and discrimination, and a number of things which have been considered at previous EDIG meetings, as well as a range of other meetings, and will be further discussed on the other talks and in the panel as well. So, you know, it's important to bear all that in mind as to the unique experiences and the way in which geosciences is presented, if you will, to racial and ethnic minority groups. So what did we do? You know, we wanted to try and tackle that by, you know, number one, increasing retention, improve the experience. There's one thing to make more people attracted to something and just bump the numbers up, and it's another thing entirely to make the space in which they find themselves equitable and just and actually safe for them to exist in, so that they can thrive as well. So we wanted to increase the experience and therefore the impact that could have on retaining people. And so we had a discipline-specific ring-fence mentoring network where we paired students with people from industry and academia, because again, as individuals, we have different lived experiences, but also different goals and, you know, what we want to achieve. And some of that might lie in academia, and some of it may lie in industry or at the intersection of the two. And therefore, having mentors who can guide in both those spaces was valuable. We want to improve access and participation to postgraduate research as well. And to help with that, we delivered a 5-day ring-fence research school for ethnic minority undergraduate students, masters and doctoral students as well. And the ring fencing is one of the, you know, thinking to this hostile environments thing, it's important to have spaces which are safe, in which people can be vulnerable, and we can talk openly about the specificities of some of the things we need to put in place to not help those people because they don't need help. You know, we also need to dismantle structurally unequal practices, but also to kind of give them additional tools and allow them to build networks which function for them, with people who they feel you know, they feel safe opening up to and trusting with the advice they're receiving. and also to remove barriers to access as well. So that relates to the point I just made. You know, it's not simply upskilling race and ethnic minority groups to exist within systems which are structurally discriminatory. It's also to try to remove barriers within those systems as well. So from the other side is to take a hard look with the people who run these systems to see how they perpetuate inequality, and therefore to make PhD student recruitment, so postgraduate research, more equitable. So why was EQUATOR novel? Well, it was student-led. It was you know, co-created. So here's Natasha and some of the EQUATOR crew in Sheffield at the research school. And so, like, listening to students and their experience and them building things which then allowed them to thrive was important, rather than trying from just a cold start, trying to magic up solutions for a group of people that you do not represent. So even though there were racial and ethnic minority people involved in EQUATOR, we had our own individual experiences which weren't readily translatable to those of some of the students, right? We grew up in a different time, we grew up in different places, and so on. So it's important to have that co-created element. It was collaborative with these different organizations to try and feed in some of the outputs, which we'll get onto, into their protocols as well. That was really important as well, to have just them as a sounding board. And then also action research, to actually think quite carefully and systematically about how we would define problems, how we would then create interventions, and then how we would measure the success of those interventions as well. So action research. So for the working group, this was that kind of latter point about change. So what did we want to do? We wanted to get information on how recruitment was currently conducted within these NERC-funded DTPs or CDTs, these doctoral training programs, and identify areas of best practice which already existed and try and disseminate those across the other DTPs and CDTs. So, you know, individuals within those different groups, which are listed here on the right-hand side, had good ideas and were locally trying to instigate change, but we wanted to make those more widely known and therefore beneficial for a broader group of people. So how was that done? There were 3 meetings. There was introductory discussions which outlined the EQUATOR project's reasoning, with a survey to be completed about the recruitment practices. There was analysis of those data as well, and brainstorming solutions to some of the problems that existed. And then feedback and discussion on the recommendations report. So again, even with the people who were the kind of gatekeepers, if you will, the people with the power, the CDT managers and the people running those, is to kind of engage with them in being self-critical about the system in which they designed or were running. So it wasn't necessarily just lobbing problems at them and critiques. It's almost to bring them in and then to have discussions around how they themselves were doing good things, but also how they could improve their practice too. So what was the summary? Where contextual data is used in admissions, there's no like kind of regular set of principles for ensuring that there is some degree of equity. Where we're collecting demographic data, there's no real way of synthesizing those data and presenting them and ensuring that across the board that, you know, things are being collected in any sort of systematic and analyzed in a rigorous way. And so there was an interest shown in sharing these frameworks, you know, and critically here kind of facilitated by NERC. So NERC as the funders, as one of the most powerful players in all of this, is for them to kind of start to impose that best practice upon the people who they're funding and the centres which they're supporting. You know, the doctoral training organisations, advertising is pretty comprehensive, but they were struggling to get diverse recruitment. And therefore attracting a diverse set of applicants, and it's complicated, as it says there. You know, there's lots of problems and lots of barriers as to why race and ethnic minority students are not applying for these advertised research opportunities. And you know, one of the common complaints is the amount of support that's required to implement any new things that come along. And I think there's probably, you know, you've probably heard this from departments or learning organisations or societies, you know, the money's all over here, you know, that would require funds to go over here to improve our practice around EDI. So there's concerns about who was going to financially support people in terms of their time to implement some of the proposals, but also, as stated there, how you would measure measure some of the outcomes. So this action research idea, we see these problems, we put in place these interventions. How would we know if they're successful? Is crystallizing those outcomes, it's crystallizing those approaches and making sure that the outcomes were very specifically defined. But these were the recommendations. They were broken out into 3 different flavors: short-term, ASAP, mid-term, within the next admission cycle, so which we've just entered now, and then longer term, which may be a few over the next few years. Recognizing that some of them are easier to implement because it's literally just editing a website, and some other things which are longer term actions, which are cultural and financial, do take a little bit more time. So student-facing recommendations for immediate immediate use are adverts on demographic-specific networks, telling people about about opportunities in places where those people typically are, like Black geographers, who are one of the supporters. Black in Geosciences, making sure that the adverts were being taken into spaces where people were looking for opportunities. Have a standardized web form to express interest, so demographic data could be collected in a more structured way. And then also assisting people ahead of applying for PhDs with upskilling them with their knowledge about what the application process will be like, what the interview process will be like, and selection criteria. Medium term, pre-interview peer mentoring. So for minoritized applicants, giving them some experience with having interviews and having access to, kind of constructive and safe and feedback in a safe space. But obviously that takes a bit of time to set up those networks. Hence, it's not a short-term thing. It's something which could be implemented and is being implemented now. And then finally, longer term, greater emphasis on this idea of having research experience placements funded by NERC for minoritized students to actually experience postgraduate research, or what it might look like, to give them a peek behind the curtain, so that they could actually then be recruited from that experience placement into being recruited into postgraduate research PhD opportunities as well. Some of them were procedural, so they weren't really faced towards the students. We wanted feedback immediately from students to assess the adverts and guidelines. How did the messaging land with them about how inclusive postgraduate research was going to be? Getting feedback and critical feedback from the groups where you're trying to kind of engage with. Medium term, have a standardized list of data to be collected, that demographic data, which allows you to demonstrate the issue and where it is, and then to put in place bespoke or kind of very carefully designed solutions. Again, if we just take terms like BAME and say we need to fix this issue with BAME student recruitment, it's not going to work, because there's lots and lots of different identities caught in that term. And so, having data at the right level that allows specific problems to be tackled. Again, this idea of ring-fence interviews of candidates from these underrepresented groups. Then longer term, have a shared framework for how this contextual data can be used to underpin positive action initiatives that then go out and more specifically target those groups. And again, that's over a number of different years, because you need to get those data, analyze it, change your practice, and then start to apply it. A lot of this kind of, often when you look at racial and ethnic minorities and people say, oh, we've got 50% racial and ethnic minorities, a lot of times those numbers are swollen by a large number of international students who are coming in. So here we were looking at, UK domiciled students. So that's not to say that international students were not subject to hostilities for postgraduate research across the piece, in lots of different bits of academia. But, they do make the demographic data look better than they are, and make certain spaces look more welcoming, inclusive than they really are. And again, ring-fence studentships for candidates from these underrepresented groups is a longer-term goal. So, we need to focus on behaviours and potential, not excellence. We need holistic schemes that recognise these awarding gaps as well. And I'm not going to talk about those things in detail today, the awarding gap, but certainly the way we measure people is often focusing on really their access to opportunity rather than their potential, because we're looking at things they've got as a function of the privilege they've held, and we really need to move beyond that. You know, longer term, we need to reduce the emphasis on supervisor sift, where supervisors are then going in, sort of coaching their favorite person through the system and then sifting out some other people that they've never heard of and favoring their people. We need to make sure that there's more of a democratic and much more transparent selection process going on. So mandatory declaration of known or internal candidates and standardized CVs and scoring sheets. It allows people to go less off-piste, if you will, and start just saying, oh, I just quite like that person, and not being able to articulate numerically, you know, kind of give a defense as to why they've given people the score they have. Like, obviously, the scoring sheets have to be designed very carefully, because the scoring sheets could be just giving people high scores for having access to privilege, and we want to make sure that the scores are given for potential and, you know, and promise. And, you know, we could make offers conditional on candidates undertaking these bridging programs. So, you know, that's related to this kind of research experience placement piece as well, is that people could actually, if they're seen to have that potential, actually be given opportunities to upskill themselves in certain technical areas, so that then they enter the PhD program with a better chance of succeeding rather than failing because they've not had access to something in the past. So it's the PhD training program taking it upon themselves to actually upskill the students in certain elements of of what's needed, and that previously they may not have had opportunity to, rather than the PhD program saying you need to turn up fully formed and write 4 papers for us by next week. The mentoring network, what did we do? We wanted to facilitate networking, improve this sense of belonging, and build a network of mentors who could help future students as well. Mentors build mentors. It was a 4-month scheme. There was 10, we had funding, and it was a 6-month project, I should have said, EQUATOR, so it wasn't very long term, but we had 10 mentees involved in that, 20 mentors. We paid people for their time because the people who were acting as mentors were obviously typically from racial and minority groups themselves, and therefore it's important to professionalize the practice of mentorship and reward it and recognize the importance of it. So we paid for people's time. And like we said earlier on, each mentee was paired with 1 industry mentor and 1 academic mentor. And, you know, the feedback was really good. That people, well, the pre-mentoring survey, because what we wanted to do as part of the action research was work out how our intervention had assisted them. You know, here's one comment from a participant who is a queer person of colour, felt that many of the people in their faculty didn't understand the challenges that came with that intersectional identity. So, you know, can we put in place in the mentoring network things that help that person, you know, have a better appreciation of identity, and also kind of demystify bits of the kind of system for them as well. So how did it go? I won't go through this in detail. It's just to say that there's a lot of deep purple in here to all of these questions. So a lot of people strongly agree that at the end of the mentoring network, they were more likely to pursue a career in geography, earth and environmental sciences, Gs, and now feel more comfortable to discuss concerns I have about my studies, you know, somewhat agree and strongly agree. So there was an increase in people feeling that they were better able to ask questions. They felt more welcome, and they felt better connected as well. So that was one outcome of the mentoring network that we put in place. And lots of quotes in there. It's kind of quite heartwarming stuff. You know, I learned that there are people like me who have been on the same journey as me, and it was just so reassuring to know that they're willing to help. And you know, that sort of paying it back feeling is good, because then those people, you know, mentors build mentors. So the free text comments were particularly heartwarming. And finally, the research school, you know, what did we do? We wanted to create this community. We wanted to bring together a large group of people. In this case, it was 30 students at this 5-day residential course school at Sheffield Hallam. We wanted to improve their awareness and perceptions of postgraduate research, their preparedness, and build their confidence as well. Again, we paid people's time. We paid the students' time to participate in the workshop. We paid the people who ran different elements of the workshop to attend, and you know, so we weren't asking for people to volunteer their time for free. We wanted to make sure that we were professionalising the practice of mentorship and EDI work, quite frankly. You know, very strong focus on inclusion, and we had 2 streams: postgraduate research and then postgraduate taught, so masters and undergraduate research as well, so people who are doing things like MScis or MPhils. And you know, all of these were trying to tackle this observation that UK students from marginalised ethnic backgrounds are less likely to attend these research intensive high tariff universities, so Russell Group, Red Brick type universities, and therefore because of that they're less likely, before applying for postgraduate research, to have access to research experience. So it kind of, the problem is baked in early before people are even applying. So this was a research school, fantastic group of people, as you can see there, having a good time. Lots of engagement on social media. This was me and Dr. Rebecca Williams from Hull, giving a workshop about interviewing for a PhD, demystifying the process. We did trial or practice mock interviews as well to get people engaged in that. And it was just an all-around fantastic experience to see people really grow through the 5 days. And, you know, it was held in Sheffield Hallam, so the students kind of went out to the Peak District. This is in Edale, not far from where I live, and the students kind of bonded at a personal level as well as at a kind of practical and professional level around what they were being exposed to during the research school, and that's exactly what we wanted. So again, you know, a bit of data. Again, all I want you to take away from this is that the, you know, are you planning to apply to postgraduate research? The purple bit on this pie on the left is smaller than the purple one on the pie on the right, which is after the research school. So you see there's a more than 2-fold increase in students who are going to apply. Some people remained unsure, and that might be because, having heard about what postgraduate research is, it's not particularly something they want to go into. They want to go into careers and different things. But again, the participant interviews or free text comments afterwards were really heartwarming. You know, this research school was, you know, helped build confidence. They'd never met anybody in their university career who had done a PhD like me, and it gave them confidence that I'm worth it and I can have a career in Geos research. And again, you know, how did you agree with the following statements? You know, again, lots of purple on here where, you know, a lot of the things we were trying to address through the action research were being met, right? So the students agreed that those targets were met. You know, they had an increased sense of belonging in Geos research. They had a broader network. These were the things we were trying to bring forward. So these are all the things you need to think about for successful interventions. You need to co-create details, right people. There's a number of different things. Long view, the kind of irony of that is the EQUATOR project was only funded for 6 months, and obviously, you know, that kind of intervention, action, research piece, so then measure things afterwards, it's all compressed. And actually, if you have more funding and more time, you can put in place more interventions, have a broader group of people accessing it. You can bring in more diverse voices supporting it, and therefore you know your outcomes, I think, will be magnified even further than what we managed to attain in this relatively short period of time. So what did we learn? You know, yeah, inclusive, ring-fence, fully funded discipline-specific interventions work. You know, sharing ideas and best practices is essential. You know, this power resides within individuals, but really part of the trick is to expose those individuals with good ideas on the gatekeeper side, you know, the people running the CDTs in this case, you know, get them together and get them sharing ideas. And that we need coordinated leadership from the top, from the funding agencies, for EDI to be effective and for them to impose upon groups minimum standards around data collection, minimum standards about inclusivity and transparency of process. Otherwise, individuals may go off and do their own thing and undermine what is a much higher level strategic goal by the funder or by the institution. So what next? This is part of the dissemination of these outputs. We're developing best practice with other funders outside of NERC and going into UKRI and other funders, feeding insights into the next doctoral training program, future research school. There's lots and lots of things. We're trying to apply for future flexible funding from NERC as well at the moment to expand some of the EQUATOR outputs. So, you know, we've got these posters as well, these outputs, which you can stick up around your halls, and you can put on the back of toilet doors, and you can send around PDFs to people, which are bite-sized pieces of some of the main kind of outcomes around doctoral recruitment, some of the things around building increased senses of belonging and improving access. And we've got this full report which gives a lot more detail and a lot of the data underpinning those recommendations. And then a number of blogs and articles and resources which are freely available to download from our website. And the blogs are really, really touching as well. They are stories, or recountings, I should say, by some of the students who participate at the research school and some other groups as well, about their experiences, and very, very emotive and very powerful. So I'd just like to say, yeah, a big thank you for the invitation to come and speak to you today, and I look forward to discussing things further. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Yeah, thanks very much, Chris, for that final talk. That was a really nice dive into the EQUATOR project, which sounds like it was very successful, both on its own terms and also in a much broader sense, because it's really nice to see a project which attempts to reduce the hierarchy and top-down approach of these initiatives that we often see, because often we might see EDI approaches being somebody at the top going, what can we do about this problem? And then just throwing a load of resources to it and hoping that they're positively received, when actually they should have asked the people that they're purporting to represent and purporting to try and improve their workspace and etc. for. So that's really, really great to see, and I really hope there's more of this kind of approach in the future, and I hope that the messages that you're trying to disseminate are taken on board. I put a link to the full report in the chat just now, and I'll just stick a link from the other resources in there now. Should be able to see that, and yeah, if you want to follow up on that, please do. It looks really, really great. So now we'll move into the latter half of the session, and this is going to be a Q&A session. We've got some really great questions in the Q&A box right now for our panelists, for our speakers. So if the speakers would like to if they would like to unmute themselves and share their video, you don't have to, but it's probably helpful to at least be heard when you're answering the questions. So I think we'll start with one that relates to the EQUATOR project while it's fresh in everybody's minds, which is quite a holistic question in a way. So it comes from Maria, and the question is, Chris, what is your opinion about applying the same rules and policies to all minoritized groups? So, for example, women, Black people, Latinos, etc. Because trying to apply the same criteria and policies to all people really goes against the intersectionality of a lot of these issues. So, how do we overcome this apparent contradiction?
Yeah, I think there's some power in an intersectional viewpoint, right, where you try and identify common barriers across numerous groups and then try and tackle those barriers, because then you raise up a large group of people. But equally, we have to disaggregate groups appropriately so that we can identify specific barriers to them. And even within groups, the experiences of individuals will vary, of course, right? So you may, like, trying to deal with all Black people in one go is not appropriate, given that Black people are not a homogenous group. So I do think, you know, the most simplest example of this I can give you is BAME, the term BAME, right, which I think has power in a statistical data collection sense, in that it anonymizes very small numbers and therefore can protect certain people. But equally, if you try and say we need something for Black and minority ethnic groups that will apply equally to all of them, that just won't work, right? Because there's massive disparities in terms of access to healthcare, education, life outcomes between Black people and people who are not Black but are part of other racial and ethnic minorities. So we need to be quite forensic about how we can kind of do a top level assessment of barriers and then see who it applies to. But then when we're trying to tackle those barriers, we need to be a bit more sophisticated.
Yeah, I think that's an essential point. Alanna, do you have any examples from the UDL sort of Universal Design for Learning approach where you might deal with this intersectionality issue? Because you alluded to that quite a lot in your presentation.
Yes. So, I mean, UDL is not some sort of panacea or silver bullet where I can use it and, you know, if a person has been experiencing racial microaggressions, right, at the institution, that it would solve that thing. But in trying to make courses, I really like that SMART from the start quote. It wasn't mine, but to me, it really sums up what UDL does. From making things smart from the start, it's for me really trying to think about all of those experiences that folks have on those different axes of identities, right? Because we know, obviously I'm speaking from a US context, but we know in other areas of the world as well, like your access to education, your ability or your knowledge to navigate sort of the unwritten rules that are expected of you sometimes comes from how you've been racialized or what class you come from. And so that's why I focus on the access and equity part of UDL, is to really think about that before building a class. So like I always use open educational resources, no matter what level of class I'm using, because that way a student doesn't have to worry about paying $90 for a textbook, right? Because that is disproportionately unfair to a certain set of populations, right? Who have probably already overcome quite a lot of things to be in a uni environment. So again, right, I don't want anyone to think that I'm like, it's a magic wand that we can wave around, right? It's not going to solve systemic racism or ableism or classism, but it's a way to ensure that the learning environment is as equitable as possible, right? Even small things like making sure to explain what you're saying. You know, we always laugh, like when we get trained past a certain point, we all speak in jargon, but really just making sure, even in grad classes, to break down like, this is what I mean by epistemology, or like this semester I'm teaching a global climate class. I'm like, this is what I mean by climate, because you can't guarantee that everyone has had the same experiences to know exactly what you're talking about. So really it's just trying to make the playing field as even as possible within sort of that microcosm of the classroom. I could go on, but I'm gonna stop.
No, yeah, that's a really essential point. And I think we can all agree that it's really important to take this approach of trying to address and interrogate our assumptions about the resources and the people we're dealing with before we dive in. And that's really important. How did that feature in the design of the Geospace Fieldwork initiative, Sean? Could you maybe say something on that and any kind of specifically intersectional issues that you encountered that you maybe didn't expect, and how you went about going around those and dealing with them?
Yeah, so one of the really important things is you don't want to build a space that's accessible for students, but like after they get there. You want to build that space before they get there. And I see Alanna shaking her head, yes, and it's very much so a principle of the universal design, right? So a colleague of mine very much so lives by this phrase of, if you build it, they will come. And being able to create those spaces to have students be able to contribute to that community that you're trying to build is really important. So you cannot build these spaces for students to be inclusive and accessible, without their input. So one of the things that we did was we were crafting a code of conduct to really create a way of, how are we going to be engaging in not only our physical spaces, but in our virtual spaces as well. Because we had this really interesting scenario going on where we had a group of students that were in person, a group of students that were not in person, but we had consistent communication between both groups and time zones during our field course. So there were some struggles there where, one of our field sites got burned down and we couldn't really go into the field in that spot. Then we had to create all these really great changes, which created some logistical nightmares with our schedule, but being open about that and as transparent as possible really got rid of many of those barriers. And some of the ways that we were really going about this was also to incorporate them into this planning process, right? So if you're planning on creating all these different field experiences and you're not including them in the conversation on what this schedule is going to be like, it gets really hard for individuals that are in remote settings, for example, that are across different time zones to plan their schedules accordingly. So being able to adapt flexibly and listen to them and being able to share our own experiences to really hear them say, hey, you're right, you've been spending 12 hours in front of the screen, you need a break. To really make that accommodation was something that was very important because we can record things, they can listen to them at more appropriate times, especially when unforeseen circumstances arose in the field. So very much so the implementation of our field course, there were always surprises that came up, but building spaces that included people from marginalized voices and giving them a voice in this platform as well was really encouraging for them to see themselves not only participate equitably, but also to share their challenges to be adapted on the fly.
Yeah, that's really great. Thanks for outlining that for us. So we've just talked quite a bit about how it's important to take on the considerations of students in any specific cases prior to designing these courses and to get a lot of bottom-up input into how we design and implement solutions to issues faced by minoritized groups. So what strategies can we then adopt to effectively encourage people to share their opinions and so on beforehand? So Chris, you talked about this in regard to the EQUATOR project, for example, and it's often an issue that we might see that people may not feel confident or in coming forward with these issues, and they may not feel like they're in the correct environment to raise an issue before it becomes a problem. So how do we go about addressing that?
It's a good question. I think there's two things. One is trust. You need to be operating in an atmosphere in which the person who has the least agency, the least powerful person in the discussion, has trust in the more powerful member, that any information that's shared some of it could be confidential, some of it could be deeply personal, is going to be respected and kept confidential within reason, because we still have safeguarding duties. So I think there's definitely that, making a trusting atmosphere in which information can be shared and a discussion can be held. The other thing that could help as well is anonymizing the kind of dialogue to some degree. So I think Alanna referred to this, and I've used things like Mentimeter in my teaching where, if you ask a question to a class, nobody wants to put their hand up because of various reasons, right? English is an additional language, or people just don't want to get it wrong, whatever it is. But if you have these tools which allow people to provide their input anonymously, they're more likely to give a feedback, and also honest feedback. And like the question refers to, that then can help guide the overall learning environment to be more inclusive if people feel that they can have their input, but without being identified. So I think it's those two things: trust and also, practical ways of gaining feedback from people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really essential point. Sean or Alanna, do either of you want to jump in with any points you might add to that?
Yeah, I just want to add, it's fairly easy to do that, right? Depending on what your learning management system is online. For WVU, we have eCampus, which is a form of Blackboard. I can have a survey, an anonymous survey, which I actually run several times throughout the semester for the students to check in. And sometimes they say things are going great. And sometimes they're like, this is BS. You need to move the deadline from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. I have, like we all have evening jobs. I've also done Google Forms or SurveyMonkey. So there's a lot of like really free and easy resources to do it. And I think Chris's point about trust is paramount, right? The students trust that I take the feedback seriously because I show them how I implement it, or if I don't implement that, I tell them why. And so they know it's not just a box ticking exercise, that I'm actually asking these questions for a reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really important point, definitely. So we've talked about trust from the bottom up, so as a way of speaking, so from those we're trying to advocate for. What about trust when we go to those in positions of power who are able to implement these changes and who have, in many cases, unfortunately, like the ultimate say in how we go about implementing a lot of the solutions we're talking about now? How can we ensure there's a good dynamic between us and who are advocating for this and those we're lobbying to implement these suggestions and these strategies? Sean, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I do not have the luxury of not disclosing that I am a quadriplegic, for example, right? I roll into that room and the first thing they see is a power wheelchair that cannot go upstairs or over rocks or off trail. And it gets really interesting, right? So to get over those boundaries is kind of like to address the elephant in the room, right? To really shake the frame of the conversation that we're trying to have in a way that's, different than previous approaches. So we cannot have any way to implement these changes without buy-in from those that are, our superiors, whether they're bosses, supervisors, or whatever, right? So being able to really address this in productive ways of, hey, look, this is a real challenge for people, to not only include those that need those changes, but getting buy-in from others that are in your department or in your groups that are not just, blatant examples of tokenism when you're trying to get these changes are really important to initiate these types of conversations and bring them into the room for these conversations for the students that are going to get impacted by them. So, they're saying no to more flexible options, whether that's for internships or field experiences or whatever, right? Put a face to the name on the individual that you're saying no to, right? If you're pushing people out of our programs because there's no buy-in to implement these changes, there's a real important aspect of this human dimension when you're trying to incorporate these changes. And it really is a way to say, oh, I didn't realize that, not implementing these changes in this very specific way would have such an important consequence on someone's future. So being able to get that buy-in and putting a face to the name of what these decisions really do are incredibly important for implementing changes in ways that are a little bit more disruptive than what we've done in the past, but are also respectful as well. If we're not being respectful, we're never going to get these changes, but they're really important for executing them, not only in our professional lives, but for the lives of students moving forward.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think it links quite nicely with a topic that was discussed in the data session yesterday, anecdata, regarding anecdotal evidence and anecdotal experiences as a form of data, right? So often you might present a load of statistics to these people at the top and they may look at it and say, yeah, sure, we'll do something about that. But until they're confronted with the specifics of an issue kind of in their face, as it were, they may not actually really appreciate what is involved for these people, and they may not appreciate how the degree or the nature of support that they really need. And in that, following on from that, Alanna, there's a question about whether you have really had trouble kind of implementing UDL in your department with regard to ensuring that those at the top are allowing it to go as you wish, and if you've received the support that you want from those who are in charge in your institution, as it were.
That's a great question. I've been fairly lucky that the current department chair is very open and understanding and for these types of things. And not too much backstory, but I'm in a currently a little bit of a weird position where I finished my PhD in April, and I'm currently a visiting assistant professor in the same department that I got the PhD, and I'll be moving on to a different institution, actually in the UK this summer. And so I was banging on about UDL as a student. So I was fortunate by the time that I was implementing these changes in classes that the faculty had been hearing me talk about it for quite a bit, so that it wasn't a new concept to them. Also here in the US, instructors have a little bit more autonomy than in the UK. So really I run my class how I want. And unless something egregious happens, you know, at least here, no one really checks in on you. But yeah, I've had, you know, the higher up, so to speak, are all for it. But the issue is, like, we can be for it and that's great, but are there actual concrete resources? So we have a fantastic teaching and learning commons at our university, and they have several videos and resources about UDL, but there's no actual, like, this is how you could potentially do it. Which is why my colleague and I wrote the paper I referenced. And so it's sort of like a two-step issue. But yeah, I've been very lucky where folks are like, yeah, we should definitely do that. And I'm like, okay, great. Do you have any suggestions? They're like, no, if you figure it out, let me know. But Google is your friend. And the student I mentioned this semester who is completely blind, we've decided to write a paper together about our experience, sort of like a how-to, because when I was looking up how do you convey climate information, you know, outside of traditional, here's a graph, look at it, there really was visual, nothing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's been an education for me.
No, that's really interesting. I really look forward to seeing that. So something that's played quite a part in your recent career, Chris, is the switch from academia to industry. I'm wondering if you can expand on any differences you've observed between those who are at the top at a university level, say Chancellor of a university, for example, and those who are like the managing director or a CEO at Jacobs or in industry, and whether there's anything that you learned from one that's not present in the other, or vice versa.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, just for a bit of background, I worked in industry before I went into academia for 3 years, and now I've gone back out into industry again. So this second bit has been only 6 months. Have I seen any similarities and differences? I think in terms of EDI, I think still you see the same thing. You see very big statements, very public statements about intent and about objectives and targets and things like that, right? And I think it's very easy to make those statements. And I think as well, it also can shower you in glory by just saying you're going to do the right thing. Now, the difference between that and doing the right thing is substantial, as Alanna sort of alluded to there. And I guess the difference I've seen is there's much more committed resources to actually making change happen. Having said that, without, like, you know, rolling my new employers under the bus, there has still been requests for time for EDI work, which is basically voluntary. It's voluntary, and it's also being picked up by historically excluded peoples, right? So there's the same issue as we had in academia, of course, right? So I think there's something. I don't think, you know, honestly, I don't think industry somehow magically has it right any more than academia. I think there's a few financial bits and pieces which are beneficial and can make action, you know, happen. But yeah, I mean, it still allows me to have something to get my teeth into every day at work, besides my technical job is trying to improve that situation.
Great. Okay. Thanks for outlining that. So we've had a really interesting question I've just seen from from Caroline. So she says, student geoscience numbers are globally declining, and trust in geoscience is recognized as a significant contributor to people turning away from undertaking geoscience degrees, at least in Australia, where she's based. Can you comment on how what we're doing to try and promote EDI in the discipline may not only promote that side of what we do, but also promote trust in geoscience and therefore impact its attractiveness as a discipline more generally? Sean, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, so when you say trust, do you mean trust between students and faculty, or trust between students and industry, or a combination of those?
That's a good point. That's not actually made clear in Caroline's question. Let's go middle of the road and maybe say a bit of both.
Okay, yeah, so that trust really starts in the classroom, right? So being able to build that trust between faculty and students, or students and industry, or even faculty and industry as well, having that relationship with your students to really build up that trust is really important. So there's this so getting vulnerable with your students at certain points, as long as it's very respectful and mature conversation, is a really great way to facilitate some really great conversations. And we've had some really great experiences of these types of conversations when we're talking about discrimination and ableism in the workplace with students who are in the Geospace program. Many of them felt that it was really great to know the real challenges and struggles of what it was like to not only overcome that in our own educational journeys, but even how we've engaged and overcome, or even are still tackling those challenges in our professional lives. So, different strategies on how did we get accessible doors in certain buildings, or even conversations around those lines, were really helpful for students to be like, no, these are real problems that are really worthwhile to change. And it's great to know that others are experiencing these same challenges, whether they are at the middle of the road of their career, or entering graduate school, or full-on professionals with really great CVs and resumes. These are things that students found unique value in. And they're also really great for us to build partnerships outwards as well. So being able to express that vulnerability in productive ways to show actionable potential changes, many of our students found very reliable, and have actually gone on to do their DEI fellowship work with graduate school, or even pursue these types of options they may have not pursued before in earth and planetary sciences as well.
Okay, great. Thanks for that contribution. Essential points. So, Alanna, we've talked about trust there between the educators and those being educated. There's another question here around supporting minorities among each other being the minimum that we can do. And Maria says, when I was in Kuwait, it was difficult for me to convince women that endorsing each other was far more important than fighting for your own personal success. So really making sure that we're working as to support each other, and working as a collective endeavor, rather than a more of a survivor bias, I suppose you might say, approach. Have you any experience with this, and do you have anything that you might offer to that point?
Sorry, I just wanted to double check. I think, well, first of all, I want to say, right, I have been racialized as white, so I can't speak for any other group, right? I'm a white woman, so that's how I've experienced things. And I do think, particularly because of the current dominant paradigm that most of our society across the globe follows, right? We've been sort of told it's all about the individual. And so that's how people understandably act, right? Sometimes we're forced into situations where you have to try and edge out over someone else. And sometimes that can be hard to counteract, right? Because it is a material reality. There's only so many jobs, there's only so many fellowships, right? But in trying to just raise people up, right? Or having those honest conversations where, like, you know, I understand you're jealous, or I understand, you know, you've gotten all of these things or whatever's going on, but like making sure, again, that people are just understanding the context that everything happens within. And I'm a big fan of, right, lifting as you rise. So as a visiting assistant professor, I don't really have that much power, right? I'm, to be quite honest, there to do the grunt work. I have 400 students. I teach 8 lectures a week. It's quite a lot, right? But making sure to change things as much as I can for my teaching assistants, getting them the recognition they deserve for all the work they do. And I like to think, maybe this is a bit pie in the sky, but like I like to think that's sort of like leading by example, right? Where I'm looking out for others. And so graduate students, teaching assistants, undergrad students get to see that there's another way to exist. But again, right, I can only speak from my personal experience. And as someone who's racialized as white, right, like I have quite a lot of skin privilege. And so it's, to be quite honest, like been much easier for me than it would be if I belonged to another group.
No, that's a good point. I'm sorry I put you a bit on the spot there, but so
no, not on the spot. That's quite all right. I mean, being a woman in academia is not that easy.
Yeah, no, certainly. And this is, I mean, the playing off of minorities against one another by powerful institutions is something we've seen from the marginalization of communities like in time immemorial. You know, that's pretty much what all colonial powers were doing while they were colonizing other places, and geoscience is obviously quite intrinsically linked with colonialism. So in regards then to the networks that we have here, and in terms of raising people up in our communities as a community, so how can the existing networks of geoscientists that we have, like this one, like others we might be involved in, how can we further these to advance EDI in our field, and how can we best broaden and strengthen these networks to give our arguments more weight and ensure that the state of the field on these issues continues to progress? Maybe Chris, you could jump in there.
Yeah, I think we, you know, I'm an old man, and so I've seen a lot of stuff in my 18 years as it was in academia before I left. And I would say that there's more of these networks. They seem to be better supported. People seem to be having difficult conversations more openly, and partly because of the fact that they've got a support network around them. So I think that's all good, right? I think I've got a longitudinal view on that. There are data showing that despite all of that, there's not been advances made for all groups equally. I think, again, Alanna referred to this, you know, there's this classic paper from Bernard and Cooper from a few years ago that showed that white women had benefited most from most of the interventions that had been implemented in the last 40 years in the US, right? So, you know, some people are benefiting from that more strongly than others. But networks are a one way of transferring, I think, good practice between different groups. So, you know, we could have a talk about, you know, gender diversity and equity, but within that, there may be some learnings going back to, I think, the question you asked me earlier on about the risks of like lumping people together. Within that particular learning for that group, there may be something of benefit for another group as well. And I think that's one place where networks can work, because networks kind of work outside of individuals, or they should do, right? They shouldn't serve any one person or any, you know, they can serve one group, but they have power beyond that, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Do you have any, Sean, do you have any examples of things that you picked up from somewhere else? Like, does a particular example spring to mind of something you learned that you maybe didn't expect to from another network and applied to your own situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the programs I learned the most from was a program that was not even within the geosciences and not even geared towards individuals with disabilities. It was specifically a pipeline program, the CUNY pipeline program, that was very specifically geared towards diversifying and demystifying the professoriate. So basically getting students from underrepresented groups to not only apply to graduate school, but also to demystify what that process is like, what the experience is like, to really diversify what our professors and faculty members actually look like. And it was the most eye-opening experience that I've ever had, because it was very much so out of my wheelhouse, where everyone was learning and sharing and being able to engage in really hard conversations that you're not going to have in the classroom. And everyone was from different fields, so being able to learn from each other that many of the struggles that we've had are been actually siloed and not been spoken about across our communities, right? But really only kind of engaged within our own small select groups. So being able to create these more open communities where we're going to include voices that aren't even in our fields, to be able to share our experiences, not in a siloed manner, but in more of this network option, are really important, because many of the struggles that we have are really important to talk about, but also maybe more similar than they are different. So being able to engage in these pipeline programs to diversify these organizations, you're bringing students together that are not the same physically, gendered, racial, or even within their own programs of study. So being able to have those conversations are really important, because it really breaks down those barriers within fields or even between fields, to really be able to learn from each other in more collaborative and engaging ways.
There we go. I'm unmuted. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's really great to learn from other people, and it's one of the things that I enjoy most about the diversity that I've encountered, particularly within EDIG. I mean, I've learned a lot from people I wouldn't expect to necessarily come into contact with very regularly. And Mel alluded to this in her talk about how we should be very wary of just going for people who maybe appear to be the right fit, but that you will learn probably the most from the people who you maybe necessarily don't see as much similarity with at the first chance. So I think.
Can I just say one thing, Rob?
Yeah,
I think one benefit of networks and what Sean just talked about there is, once you start to identify barriers for one group, it becomes a bit of a habit, so that you start to think more deeply, I think, in general. So I think I think networks and people, and dare I say it, by becoming more woke and more alert to barriers, let's use it in a positive term rather than the slur. I think once you get in that headspace, it's actually really straightforward to actually think quite hard about people who aren't you. So I think that's where networks and we can benefit.
No, I couldn't agree more. The more different perspectives that you get, the more you spot similarities between situations, and the more you think, oh, actually, yeah, no, there are a lot of things we can do that will not just benefit this one group, but will benefit many people. I couldn't agree more. So I think we're going to round out this discussion with one last point that I'd like each of you to kind of come around to, and it's quite a difficult question. So, and I'm aware that I haven't necessarily got to all of the questions in the Q&A. Sorry about that. If you feel your question was missed, you should maybe consider contacting any of the speakers by email. I think they're all quite happy with that caring. But my final point to ask is, how optimistic are you that we're making steps in the right direction on this within geosciences? And if you're not optimistic about a particular thing, do you have any suggestions for one particular improvement or one particular strategy that might swing the balance a little bit? Maybe we'll start with you, Alanna.
I think that I would say I'm cynically optimistic. I try to be optimistic in general, because I think, to be quite honest, I think to be negative is a privileged position, because that means you have the space to be able to be okay with how things are and not have to fight to change. I'm cautiously optimistic because, as Chris and Sean and several other people have alluded to, right, there's a lot of talking around equality, diversity, and inclusion. And sometimes, most of the time, it doesn't necessarily translate to direct action, but sometimes it does. And so I'm cynically or cautiously optimistic, because I think, right, the conversations we're having now are much better than the conversations 5 years ago or 10 years ago, right? So I think that we're at least heading in a better direction. But I think the biggest push down will be to get these conversations to make material impacts, and also to get people to understand exactly what, in the US we call it DEI, I know in the UK it's EDI, what this means, right? Because it's unfair to recruit people from marginalized communities into spaces which may potentially further marginalize or traumatize them, right? So we need to make sure we understand it as a systemic issue. So I think that what Chris is talking about with networks is just really important, right? Because we're hearing from outside spaces. So for instance, honestly, until I got the email, I didn't know EDIG existed. But, you know, digging further into it, pun intended, my apologies, right? Like, I think it's such a valuable resource. And, you know, I've been telling absolutely everybody that I know here about it. And so I think, right, it's the potential to push forward, but we have to be very mindful about what we're doing.
No, that's very true. Yeah, and thank you for spreading the word about EDIG. That's very nice of you. Chris, do you have any thoughts about whether we're going in the right direction, and if there's any one thing that you think could shift us further that way?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe I'm slightly more on the cynical side of the cynical bit where Alanna is. I think that there's been this increasing discussion, like I said, over my career, and I think that's great. I think what that's done is it's drawn out opposition that probably was always resident in certain people, but now, because they're confronted with graphs and stories, they become more hostile towards the challenging of their history. You know, they believed it was a meritocracy. There's a bunch of data now being brought forward which suggests it isn't. And because of that, it's very hard for those people to decouple their experience from the framework within which they achieve so much, right? They think that they got there purely on their own merit. The problem there is those people are in leadership positions, of course, right? Because they're like 2 decades ahead of us. So, I mean, simply put, I think you can only just burn it all down to the ground. I think you need like root and branch reform of how we recognize value in people and what we want, and I think it's dirty work. I think DI work is dirty, unpleasant, emotionally challenging, physically disruptive work. And I'd love to be more optimistic in telling people that, but I think to move beyond platitudes and posters and websites, you actually have to do something, and it often requires not just money on the table, but it requires, you know, changing hearts and minds with you know, really kind of difficult conversations and difficult revelations, of course. So yeah, I think you know, that's not a solution. That's just to kind of impress upon people who are still here that that's the scale of the challenge we have, and you need to get ready for it.
No, I couldn't agree more, and I think that especially within certain societies, it may be difficult. You may feel very uncomfortable having these difficult conversations with the people that it actually matters to have the conversation with. And I think preparing yourself for that mentally is sometimes quite difficult to come to terms with. That these conversations are not necessarily going to be nice. You know, they're not always going to they're not always going to necessarily resolve themselves positively, but you have to start somewhere. Sean, do you maybe have a final thought on this point?
Yeah, so I am also cautiously optimistic, but probably a little bit more on the optimistic side, but call me doe-eyed for just starting my new lecturer position for the first year. But, you know, I think there's 2 things here, right? So the first is that A lot of this work falls disproportionately on those that benefit the most from this DEI work, especially in the United States, right? The people that we have engaging in these conversations are the people that very specifically need these accommodations or these changes or adjustments to make the environment more welcoming for the people that we want in the spaces that we're advocating for within the geosciences. And the second one is that these conversations make people really uncomfortable. So you need to find some kind of comfortability in the discomfort of these conversations. And, call me very New York, right? Where, I am A-okay making other people uncomfortable, where, they may have the privilege of not actually engaging in things that are going to disrupt their comfortability, right? So part of that is what Chris said. The individuals that are really in charge of making people more open to these changes are a decade or two ahead of us professionally, right? Being able to, for me in that case, roll into that room and be like, so when are we fixing the automatic door that lets me get into my office? Are going to be really important conversations that, are going to make others uncomfortable, right? And there are strategies that we've gone about this in the past where, especially in New York City, for example, of being able to add in more elevators, not because it benefited the disability community, but because it benefited moms, right? Moms with strollers getting their kids from the subway system all the way back up to the street to be able to navigate those spaces. By making accommodations for one specific group, they're making accommodations for all of these groups as well. And they're going to have those further impacts that are unintended, right? So being able to really be disruptive and make others uncomfortable are really important. So being able to revel in that discomfort is going to be really important, but it's hard, right? How do you tell people like you need to get comfortable being uncomfortable, right? It's terrible advice, but also, being able to enter those spaces and challenge the norm is going to be really important as we go forward. And, the spaces that we have on social media currently are really great ways for these conversations to really unfold and make new connections and build up our networks through conversations like we're having here with EDIG, but also other conversations that we're having nationally or internationally as well.
Excellent. That's a great message to finish on, I think. So, yes, that concludes session 3 and also the conference at large. Thank you very much to all of our speakers and panelists. So in session 3, that would be Chris Jackson, Sean Thatcher, Alanna Higgins, and Melanie Finch. And if you have any questions that were not answered in this session that you would like to ask, you can put them in the Padlet that was linked to above in the chat. And I think all our speakers will be happy to access that and respond to them there if that's okay. And thank you all for attending. This conversation is really important, and all of your inputs in terms of asking questions and in terms of maybe learning something from each other is really appreciated and really important. All of you will receive a follow-up email for feedback on the conference as well via Eventbrite after the event, and all of the resources that we've accumulated via having this conference will be available on YouTube, and there will also potentially be some blog posts about the sessions upcoming as well, so keep an eye out for those. Thank you very much to all of the sponsors of the event that you can see around the sides of my background just here. I won't name them all, but there's quite a few of them. And special thanks to the National Science and Policy Network for allowing this the Zoom conferencing to occur. And I must finally extend thanks to all of the EDIG volunteers who have contributed their time to making these sessions and the whole event run smoothly. EDIG itself will be taking a bit of a break over the next bit of time, because putting this together has been quite a bit of work for us, and we'd like to have a bit of time to reflect on what we've done here and think about how we might progress as an organization. But we'll be back next year with more events and more content as well. So yeah, hope to see some of you at any of these future events, and also hope to keep you all engaged in the discussion that we're having here, because this really should go beyond one organization. It should be something that we're considering throughout our practice in geoscience. So yes, thank you very much all for attending, and hopefully we'll see you at one of our future events, as I said. I don't think I've missed anything there, so that's nice. Great.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers, Chris.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.